There was a study released last week that I've been reading over the past 10 days or so, and the study looked at people who were raised in a religion but now do not practice it anymore. And interestingly, a very small percentage of those who left a faith that they were raised in, a very small percentage left over doctrine. Things like in the Catholic Church, teachings on contraception or marriage between a man and a woman, abortion, those difficult teachings that we sometimes discuss and argue about and are brought up, those were actually not a major reason why people left their faith. By far, the largest category of people who had left their faith said that they left because of science, or some variation closely related to science. One sample response that was mentioned in the study, "I'm a scientist now and I don't believe in miracles." This study confirms once again that many see, I think, a great battle taking place in our world between faith and science. And we've heard that for a long time, for 500 plus years in our Catholic faith. People here, of course, oftentimes point to Galileo. The controversy is proof that the Catholic Church does, in fact, hate science and is at war with it. Of course, what many people forget to realize is that what that actually was a personal rift between the Pope and an acquaintance of his, Galileo, that caused the controversy. Nor do many people know that scientifically speaking, we now know that both the Church and Galileo were wrong. Nor can anyone or most people point to any other instance of the Church hating science or coming after a scientist. But nonetheless, there we have it. The Catholic Church hates science. And Galileo is proof. But again, maybe you in your own family or in your circle of friends or coworkers know someone who is like those people in that study, the vast majority of people, who would say, "I left my Catholic faith because I believe in what I can measure and test and study and observe." Maybe part of you wrestles with that. I know at times growing up Catholic, I certainly wrestled with that question. And so I was reading through this report, this study that had been done. It came across my Twitter feed that Pope Francis this week addressed scientists. I'm sure that meeting had been scheduled long before and was not a reaction to the study, but for me, I found it to be very helpful and providential. One of the things that Pope Francis told this gathering of scientists is this: openness to the grace of God does not weaken human science, but rather leads it to move forward. Faith, basically what Pope Francis is saying, faith does not antagonize or attack science. Faith can help lead and inform the scientist. His point is one that's been made many other times, St. John Paul II and countless other saints and intellectuals, reminding the world that our Catholic faith does not compete against science. Science, when it's done without an agenda, seeks to know what is true. And so does our faith, when it is pursued without an agenda as well. Of course, a problem arises that Pope Francis speaks about. Faith and science can both be done with an agenda. The Catholic faith has obviously been practiced by people who had ulterior motives, agendas, and personal interests that caused them to practice their faith. We can also hopefully recognize that sometimes science is practiced with an agenda and a pretext for advancing personal interests. I'm reading a book right now on cyber psychology, the study of what happens to our brains when we get online. It amazes me, though, and it's very good, but it amazes me how quickly the author switches back and forth from science to her opinions. and how quickly, and I think in her mind, her opinions are science. That's very dangerous. Science and faith can both be practiced with an agenda, and that is a very big problem. Pope Francis addressed this challenge when he said, every scientist needs to be watchful for the toxins that poison the pursuit of truth, and certainly admit that every scientist has their own history, their own background, their own beliefs, which can spill into their work. That's not the Pope hating science. He's making an observation about both faith and science. I think it's also then good for us at this point. The reason I bring all of this up, I didn't just mention it because it's what I happen to be reading, but our first reading touches on this important point very beautifully. We read in the Book of Wisdom this, scarcely do we guess the things on earth. This is a very beautiful and true admission, and what it's basically saying, there is so much we don't know about what we see in our daily lives. There is so much that we don't know. Scarcely do we guess the things that take place on earth. That's not faith taunting science, saying, ha ha, that you don't know everything, you don't know hardly anything about what's going on in the world, there's so much that you can't prove with your science. It's simply stating something very true. There is a vast percentage of the things that take place in our lives that we cannot measure or study or quantify. I am a big fan of science. I love science shows and have since I was a little kid. Nature and PBS. I love studying math. I love sociological scientific studies. I love psychology. Physics and electricity still boggle my mind, but I love trying to understand it. Biology and the study of plants excites me because I like to spend some of my free time outside hiking. Study of nature. I'm still completely humbled and amazed by the medical advances that take place in science, particularly in my own case, the science and doctors and amazing work that went behind my brother in his fight with cancer. I love science and the study of the things that are observable. It has given us very much. Water purification and the ability for many people to have clean drinking water, the ability to connect with people all over the world through the internet and computers, surgery, healing, the ability to increase the productivity of our land so that starving people can have access to food. The list goes on, the fruits and benefits of science. The church sponsors science. The church funds science. Most of the early scientists in the scientific revolution were priests and Catholics. While saying that we love science, we still should be able at the end of listing all that to say exactly what our first reading says. In humility, scarcely do we understand the things that take place on earth. There's so much that we still don't understand, that we will never be able to prove with a scientific formula or a ruler or a microscope. A question then for those who are leaving the faith over science or the provable or observable. Are all the things that we see in our world, war, violence, abuse, terrorism, slavery, bullying, suicide, greed, destruction of the environment, the abortion of children and even killing them after they're born, is that all explainable by chemistry? Is it all explainable through psychology? Is it all explainable by the theory of relativity? And the other side of the negative coin is all of the good things that we see, the acts of kindness, the sacrifices people make for others, the charity, the love. Tomorrow, Mother Teresa will be canonized a saint. Is the life of Mother Teresa able to be explained using electrons and photons, or behavioral psychology, or a brain study? Pope Francis, answered this question yet again this week. We reminded the scientists that the sciences alone are not sufficient to understand the mystery contained within each person. I think if we have a little bit of humility, we can all admit that. There's a lot going on in the world that we will never be able to completely get our arms around with science, no matter how far science progresses. First reading notes, the wisdom God gives is what is needed to complete our understanding of the world. To complete the picture, we need the wisdom that only comes through the Holy Spirit. We need the wisdom of God in order to begin to make sense of what we see, to fill in the gaps that are rather large in the things that happen in our reality that are not explainable through science. Some, of course, say here that science hasn't given us an answer to everything yet, but it will 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. But the interesting thing is that statement is a complete act of faith. And it is unscientific as saying there are three persons in one God, because to say that science will eventually explain everything is completely unscientific. Science hasn't explained everything yet. In fact, it hasn't explained much, hardly anything, in terms of the percentage of what we experience. So a person that says that is putting their hope in something that no one has ever observed, that science will one day explain everything. Thus they commit the very crime they accuse the person of faith of, believing something will be true that hasn't been observed. And so as a person who loves and is amazed by science, probably like most of you, by biology and math and physics, astronomy, all these other things, my experience has been one in which the study of science has been the exact opposite of a threat to my faith. The more I've learned about science, the more I observe trees growing, children growing in the womb through the power of ultrasounds, the more I learn about the universe and the structure of the atom and the stars and the northern lights and the human body, the closer it has brought me to my Catholic faith and to God. Science has deepened my faith, not drawn me away from it. St. John Paul II once said that faith and science are two wings by which we come to know the truth, by which we soar to the heights of understanding. May all those who see a conflict between the study of the observable and the pursuit of wisdom through faith once again recognize that for all those pursuing the truth of the world, studying the observable shouldn't lead us away from the faith. Faith and science, if both are pursued in honesty and humility, help us to see and appreciate the entirety of what we see when we look around at reality. May we never lose sight of the infinite number of miracles that we see each day.